The French and Indian War. How did British policies conflict with the colonists' beliefs about government and individual rights? For decades, Great Britain and France had competed for the land and power in Europe and in the Americas. In North America, the French controlled much of what is now Canada and land west of the Great Lakes. A point of conflict between the two nations was the Ohio River Valley. Both nations thought they should control this area. It was a profitable source of trade. Between 1754 and 1763, this competition erupted in a war that Americans called the French and Indian War. In this war, the British defeated the French and France's Native American allies, establishing control over large parts of North America. The British even gained new territory east of the Mississippi and in Canada. However, the war, which was conducted on both sides of the Atlantic, cost the British government a significant amount of money. As a result, members of the British Parliament thought that the colonies should help pay for the war. They felt the taxes were justified because the money originally was spent in defense of the colonies. Many colonists saw this issue in a different way. They were concerned about what they felt was lack of representation in the British Parliament. Without that representation, many felt that the additional taxes were not fair. New restrictions. After the war, the British were concerned about the continuing costs of war with Native Americans on the western borders of the colonies. The British issued the Proclamation of 1763, which sought to restrict colonists from settling on land west of the Appalachian Mountains. The British thought this would reduce conflict with Native Americans in the region. Many colonists thought this law violated their rights because the decision was made without their consent. To pay down their debt from the war, the British passed several legislative acts in the 2 years following the end of the war. The Sugar Act of 1764 actually reduced the duty or tax colonists would have to pay for molasses to encourage colonists to stop smuggling molasses and pay their duty instead. The British intended to enforce the act more strictly than in the past. Some colonists disliked the tax because they did not believe that the British had a right to tax them at all without any colonial representation in Parliament. Other acts received more resistance from the colonists. In 1765, the British passed the Quartering Act. This made the colonists provide housing, food, and transportation for the British soldiers in North America. The British Parliament felt that this was justified because British troops had fought in defense of the colonists during the war. Many colonists disagreed. They felt that the responsibility to care for British troops should be Great Britain's alone. Taxes, taxes, and more taxes. Duties or taxes were charged on many goods to regulate trade. Colonial representative assemblies debated and voted upon any new taxes from the British government. Many colonists believed in the principles of representative government and the consent of the governed. They did not believe that the British government could tax the colonies unless colonial representation were a part of that government. In 1765, the British broke with these democratic principles. Rather than give the colonists the opportunity to debate new legislative acts, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act of 1765 and the Townshend Acts of 1767. Both acts were not intended to regulate trade. They were designed specifically to raise money for the British government. The colonies had to pay taxes on many commonly purchased items such as lead, paint, paper, and tea for the first time. Strong public opposition to both acts was swift. Protests were held across the colonies. Many colonists refused to pay any taxes associated with the Stamp Act. Representatives from several colonies successfully petitioned the king to repeal this act the following year. The Townshend Acts were proved to be more difficult to repeal. The colonists resorted to protests, legal petitions, and even physical violence in the opposition to the acts. It was not until March 5, 1770, that the acts were repealed. However, another event that same day would increase tensions between the colonists and Great Britain.